pension can be an incredible benefit if you're lucky enough to have one, but not unless you consider the risks and have a plan to navigate them. In this video, I'm going to talk about the 3 major risks with the pension benefit and why ultimately saving still matters. We'll take a look at examples of real client situations and review some charts to see how these risks can creep up on you over time. But first, let's talk about how these risks can be avoided. Nothing is insurmountable with the proper type of planning. If you're driving across the country and you know there's a tree down, you're going to take a different direction. If you know there's going to be some rough terrain, you're going to take a 4-wheel drive vehicle. But if you don't do your research and you don't consider the implications of each and every decision, you could end up on the side of the road trying to hitch a ride from one of your children. I don't want you to be in that situation. If you have questions along the way or just want to share your experiences with your pension, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'd love to hear the discussion. Let's talk about the first risk, which is inflation. And I'm going to switch over to this pretty chart here in a second, and we're going to talk about how inflation can eat away at your financial plan over time. But first, let's talk about who might have inflation protection in their pension, also known as a COLA, and why all COLAs aren't created equal. So chances are if you're in a private sector pension, you don't have a cost of living adjustment, which means you have more inflation risk. Now, if you have a public sector pension, I would look at the fine print and do some research because a large majority of public sector pensions offer what's called simple interest COLAs, and some of them only offer them on an ad hoc basis. So simple interest COLAs only apply that interest, let's call it 2%, to the base benefit. So let's say your benefit's $100,000 a year. You would get an increase of $2,000 each year, 2% of the initial benefit. But if it was compounded interest, your benefit would increase as a percentage of the previous year's benefit. Now, why is this important? Because inflation compounds. If the Fed says we have 3% inflation in that year, that means that the prices have increased by 3% from the previous year, not the year you were born. So in short, simple interest cost of living adjustments is like going on a road trip with a leaky tire. You're going to get there eventually, but it's going to get bumpier along the way. So let's look at what happens if there's no cost of living adjustment. So in this chart, we can see that this person's living expenses go up over time. So their desired living expenses, $140,000 a year, plus they have some healthcare expenses that are going to be inflated at a higher rate. We have basic inflation for basic living expenses going up at 2.5% a year. So here's their pension, and it's a $65,000 pension, but it doesn't change each year. So this is the amount after taxes are withheld, which came out to $59,000, but it stays the same every year in retirement. And you can see how their expenses just go up over time. So what happens is that their portfolio withdrawals have to increase over time, and that's going to slowly eat away at their investment portfolio. Now, Social Security kicks in eventually, and Social Security does increase over time, but remember, we did have a long period of time where Social Security didn't increase at all. So in this person's financial plan, and they have $2.5 million in a taxable account, they have a surplus at the end of their plan, so they're doing okay. But what happens if inflation increases? So this individual has a $2.5 million investment portfolio, and they're able to withstand the inflation even though their pension does not have a cost of living adjustment. But what if inflation was higher? So right now we have it modeled for their basic living expenses at 2.5%. So here's what happened if we set it to 3.5%. So because they don't have a cost of living adjustment in their pension, that's going to stay the same throughout their life. Social Security isn't going up by 3.5%, and they end up with an essential shortfall. So before they had a surplus of almost $1 million, and now they have a shortfall of almost $1 million because inflation ate away at their portfolio. And because of that, the amount that they have to pull out of their portfolio every year goes up significantly. So now let's take a look at what happens if we add some gap years. So one of the risks of retiring with a pension is that if you retire before your pension kicks in and before Social Security kicks in, you have what's called gap years. And these are the years that you have to take an elevated amount of withdrawals out of your portfolio in order to meet your living expenses. So in this case, we're going to assume that instead of him retiring at 62 when his pension ultimately kicks in, we're going to say he retires at 59 and see what happens. Here you could see his total portfolio withdrawals have to increase in the first couple years, and they have to increase significantly in order to make his living expenses. Ultimately, the post-retirement kicks in, his pension kicks in at age 62, and then Social Security. And for the sake of this example, we're going back to assuming that inflation is 2.5%, but even so, there's still an essential shortfall at the end of his life. And the major reason why is because of those gap years. So those first couple years before the pension kicks in, and then before Social Security kicks in. So now we've looked at two risks. We've looked at the possibility of gap years, but also having a pension that doesn't have a cost of living adjustment. And these two things together led to an essential shortfall for this individual. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is the survivor benefit. So when you get that paperwork from your employer, you're going to have a couple of different options. You're going to have a single life annuity, you're going to have 50% survivor benefit, or even 100% joint survivor benefit. And that single life annuity is going to be the higher benefit. Now, there are a lot of reasons why somebody might take a single life annuity, and there'll be a link in the show notes if you want to download a guide that we have that goes through all of the different options. But so while there are some reasons why somebody might take a single life annuity, there's also a lot of reasons why you may want to take the 100% survivor benefit. So in our original example with the gap years and the no cost of living adjustment, we had 100% survivor benefit. But what happens if we change it to a 50% survivor benefit? What you can see here is not only does Social Security go down by a good amount, from 120,000 in 2056 to 90,000 in 2057. So that's just the Social Security benefit, but the pension gets cut on top of that. So the pension in that year goes from 63,000 down to 32,000. So it takes a big hit, and the financial plan for that surviving spouse also takes a big hit. In this example, we have John, the pensioner, living till 90 and the surviving spouse living till 95. But what happens if John predeceases Sarah at a much earlier age? So if John predeceases Sarah at age 80, that means that Sarah has to live for almost another 20 years with not only less Social Security, but also a lesser benefit if we assume a 50% survivor benefit. So here we could see John predeceasing Sarah at a much younger age, at age 80, and then Sarah has to live for the rest of her life for another 20 or so years with less income, less guaranteed income, and it leads to a much bigger essential shortfall in this scenario. So while one of these risks by itself may not be detrimental to your financial plan, when you look at multiple risks and the potential of something happening, I mean, somebody dying early is certainly a possibility, right? If you make the wrong survivor election and they die early, well, that could be detrimental to your financial plan and just give you less resiliency, right? So you always want to take these things into consideration. And here, where we have gap years, we have no cost of living adjustment, and we have the wrong survivor election with an early death, can lead to a potential of running out of money before the end of your life. So to wrap this up, pensions can be an incredible benefit. They provide stability and predictability that most retirees don't have today. But like we saw in these examples, there are real risks you have to plan for. The good news, none of these risks are insurmountable. With the right type of financial planning, adjusting your withdrawal strategy, building in buffers, or coordinating your pension with other retirement income, you can keep your plan on track and sleep better at night. If you've enjoyed this video, please go ahead and subscribe so you can be notified of more videos in the future. Thanks for watching today.